The early September morning mist over the Bay of Salerno was heavy, but it could not conceal the anticipation and tension of the Allied armada assembling offshore. Thousands of ships, from massive troop transports to armored landing craft, rocked gently with the waves, carrying the soldiers, tanks, and supplies that would begin the invasion of mainland Italy. The sky was overcast, and the sun had yet to rise, casting a muted light over the nervous faces of men who knew that history was about to be written in blood. The first waves of American and British troops prepared to hit the beaches at dawn. Each soldier checked his weapon, adjusted his pack, and stared at the horizon, knowing the German and Italian defenders had fortified these shores. Artillery fire from naval bombardments began to ripple across the water, sending flashes and smoke into the mist. From the cliffs above, German observers calculated ranges, signaling to hidden gun batteries that had waited for months for the invasion that now seemed imminent. Landing craft crept toward the beaches, their ramps lowering as soldiers braced for the plunge into the frigid waters. The first to touch the sand faced machine gun fire and artillery that had been aimed at every conceivable point of entry. Explosions threw sand and water into the air, while men shouted orders, crawled, and fired as they advanced. Tanks disembarked behind the infantry, their tracks digging into the sand, pushing forward through smoke and debris. The coordination between armored units and foot soldiers was a delicate balance. One misstep could result in disaster. The German defensive positions were formidable. Machine guns were mounted in reinforced bunkers, while artillery pounded the beaches with rapid, precise fire. Mortar teams hidden in the dunes launched shells and arcs designed to disrupt the landing waves. Infantry units entrenched on the bluffs above poured concentrated fire onto the approaching soldiers. Yet despite the hail of lead, the Allies pressed forward, advancing toward the first lines of obstacles and barbed wire. Engineers followed closely, cutting through obstructions, setting charges to clear paths, and under constant threat of enemy fire. The tanks, especially the M4 Shermans and Churchill variants adapted for amphibious landings, became a lifeline. Their guns targeted enemy bunkers and fortified positions, sometimes firing directly into German defensive emplacements, creating breaches through which infantry could push. Explosions from tank shells shook the beach, throwing sand and concrete fragments into the air. The coordination between the armor and the landing infantry was essential. Each step forward was paved for in sweat, blood, and relentless determination. As the morning progressed, the Allies began to secure the beachhead. German counterattacks were immediate but disjointed, hampered by the intensity of naval bombardments and the sheer volume of troops flooding ashore. Yet the cost was high. Casualties mounted with every step inland. Soldiers helped the wounded while maintaining their advance, using every available cover, from destroyed vehicles to sand dunes, to press forward. Air superiority, while not absolute, played a crucial role. Allied fighter-bombers patrolled the skies, strafing artillery positions and supply lines behind German lines. Flak bursts rose from enemy batteries, but the aerial attacks disrupted reinforcements and created openings for advancing infantry and armor. Bombing runs targeted defensive emplacements, sending plumes of smoke into the sky and further confusing German troops. By midday, the beachhead had expanded several kilometers inland. Engineers had cleared paths for armored columns, which began advancing toward the first strategic objectives: crossroads, small villages, and bridges essential for further movement. German defenders regrouped and prepared counterattacks, but the overwhelming presence of Allied firepower, coordination, and sheer determination pushed them back. Even as the sun climbed higher, the battle raged. Infantry engaged in house-to-house combat in small coastal villages. Tanks fired into fortified positions, creating breaches. Artillery shells fell intermittently on German positions, shaking the ground and adding chaos to the battlefield. Every gain was contested, every foot of terrain hard-won. The first day of Operation Avalanche had set the tone, brutal, intense, and decisive. As night fell, the Allies consolidated positions, tending to the wounded, resupplying ammunition, and preparing for the inevitable German counterattacks that would define the next phase of the invasion. The beachhead was established, but the campaign for Italy was only beginning. Each soldier, each tank, each artillery piece now had to fight not only for survival but for the opening of a path that would carry the war through the rugged Italian terrain and toward ultimate victory. The night over Salerno was restless. Fires from the beachhead burned across the sand, casting flickering shadows over the advancing Allied positions. Soldiers huddled in shallow trenches, their eyes scanning the darkness for signs of German movement. Engineers worked tirelessly, repairing tracks and clearing debris, while medics moved between squads, attending to the wounded. Sleep was impossible. The faint sound of distant artillery and sporadic gunfire reminded everyone that the enemy had not yet conceded the ground. Before dawn, the Germans launched their first coordinated counterattack. Panzer IVs and Stuggy 3 assault guns rolled silently through the olive groves, their steel tracks barely making a sound on the soft earth. Infantry followed closely, moving in tactical formations, exploiting terrain features for cover. Machine guns and mortars prepared to open fire as the armored spearhead approached, targeting the thin lines of Allied troops who were still consolidating their positions. Allied forward observers quickly identified the movement. Artillery crews, already in pre-registered positions, unleashed a storm of shells on suspected German assembly points. The earth shook as explosions ripped through groves and fields. Dust, smoke, and fire rose in great clouds, forcing German crews to disperse. But even as shells fell, the first waves of German infantry reached the forward Allied lines, exchanging fire in a deadly ballet of bullets and shrapnel. Sherman tanks and British Churchills were positioned along cleared roads and open fields, providing a protective cordon for infantry units. Their 75mm and 6-pounder guns engaged German armor, aiming for flanks and weak spots. Tigers, though fewer in number, appeared intermittently, firing devastatingly accurate shots. One Sherman was obliterated in a single hit, flipping violently in the dirt, its crew scrambling to take cover. Yet the Allies pressed forward, using combined arms tactics learned from the beaches and prior campaigns. The fight spread quickly across the coastal plains. Olive groves became death traps, with German infantry concealed behind trees and low stone walls. Mortars and machine guns rattled in unison, creating fields of fire that forced Allied soldiers to advance in short, cautious bursts. Engineers moved ahead to clear minefields and obstacles while under constant threat. Smoke grenades and artillery fire were used to obscure movement, but the terrain, broken and uneven, made every step precarious. By midday, small villages along the coastal approach became focal points of combat. Streets were narrow, lined with stone buildings that had been hastily reinforced by German engineers. Infantry squads moved house to house, clearing rooms, firing from windows, and advancing through collapsed walls. Tanks followed closely, using main guns to neutralize fortified positions and clear rubble. The cityscape had become a lethal maze, where every corner could conceal a sniper, a machine gun, or a Panzerfaust waiting to strike. Allied air support was constant but dangerous. Typhoons and Spitfires strafed German positions in surrounding fields and ridges. Rockets slashed through the air, targeting armor and artillery emplacements. The roar of engines above created a tension-filled atmosphere, punctuated by bursts of anti-aircraft fire from the German defenders. Pilots maneuvered at low altitude, coordinating with forward observers to avoid hitting friendly forces while maximizing damage to enemy positions. The Germans, well aware of the strategic importance of Salerno, committed reinforcements from the interior. Infantry divisions, supported by additional armor, attempted to penetrate the beachhead's flanks. But the Allies, now entrenched in the initial perimeter, used overlapping fields of fire to repel assaults. Tanks and artillery struck from multiple angles, creating kill zones where attacking units were cut down before reaching the front lines. Smoke, dust, and flame filled the battlefield, turning the landscape into a surreal theater of war. Supply lines became critical. Convoys of trucks and half-tracks pushed ammunition, food, and fuel to forward positions despite constant harassment from artillery and snipers. Engineers repaired bridges and cleared roads destroyed by German demolition teams, ensuring that tanks and infantry could continue their advance. Every logistical success directly influenced the front lines, allowing the Allies to sustain relentless pressure. By late afternoon, the first German counterattacks had been repelled, but at significant cost. The beachhead was secure, yet the battle for Salerno was far from over. Infantry dug in, tanks prepared firing positions, and artillery recalibrated to support the next phase. Casualties were counted in the hundreds, yet every man knew that holding this ground was essential for the push into the Italian interior. Night fell again over Salerno, cloaking the battlefield in shadows. Fires burned, illuminating shattered terrain and twisted steel. The sounds of distant gunfire, explosions, and the occasional tank engine reminded everyone that tomorrow would bring a new wave of attacks. Soldiers, weary but resolute, prepared for another day of relentless combat. The struggle for Italy had begun in earnest, and every Allied step forward was a step toward liberation, but at a staggering human cost. The dawn over Salerno revealed the devastation of the previous day. Smoke still rose from shattered buildings along the beaches, and scorched earth stretched into the foothills of the Italian interior. Allied forces, though battered and exhausted, were determined to push forward. Their objective was clear: secure the surrounding villages, gain control of the road network, and establish a strong foothold to support further advances into the rugged terrain of southern Italy. Infantry units moved cautiously through the first wave of villages, their rifles and machine guns at the ready. Every doorway, alley, and cellar presented a potential threat. German defenders, though disrupted by the beachhead assault and artillery barrages, had reorganized and fortified their positions within the towns. Mines were laid along streets and near bridges, while concealed machine gun nests and sniper positions awaited the advancing troops. Armored units, particularly Sherman and Churchill tanks, followed closely, providing both firepower and psychological support. Their cannons targeted reinforced structures, blasting through walls to eliminate enemy strongpoints. Flames and debris filled the air, forcing soldiers to navigate carefully as they pressed forward. Engineers moved alongside the infantry, clearing mines and removing obstacles while under constant threat from German fire. The combination of tanks, infantry, and engineers exemplified the hard-earned lessons of previous amphibious assaults. As the Allies advanced, German forces executed tactical counterattacks. Stugge 3 assault guns and Panzer IVs attempted to strike at the flanks of Allied columns. Hidden artillery opened fire from higher ground, and German infantry launched short, precise attacks aimed at disrupting the cohesion of advancing units. The Allies responded with coordinated artillery barrages, tank fire, and air support. Typhoons swooped in to suppress enemy positions, their rockets tearing through fortified emplacements and creating smoke that concealed advancing troops. One village in particular, nestled between olive groves and rolling hills, became a brutal focal point of combat. Streets were narrow and filled with debris from previous shelling. Soldiers moved house to house, clearing rooms, basements, and attics, while tanks fired directly into fortified positions. Every step forward was met with resistance, grenades lobbed from windows, rifles cracking from hidden corners, and machine guns rattling in the shadows. The battle was intense, chaotic, and unforgiving. Communication between units was critical. Forward observers coordinated with artillery and air support, marking German positions with smoke and signal flares. Radio operators relayed information between tanks and infantry, ensuring that firepower was concentrated where it could have the greatest effect. Supply lines were stretched thin, with trucks and half-tracks moving cautiously through contested roads to deliver ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies to the front. By midday, Allied forces began to secure sections of the village, pushing German defenders back into secondary positions. Panzer grenadiers attempted to regroup, but overlapping fields of fire from infantry and tanks prevented them from mounting an effective counterattack. The village became a patchwork of contested zones, with small pockets of German resistance holding out in cellars, courtyards, and behind stone walls. Engineers placed charges to breach fortified buildings, while infantry stormed through debris-littered streets, clearing resistance with meticulous care. The surrounding terrain, olive groves, hills, and valleys, added further complexity. German forces used the high ground to fire down on advancing Allied units, while natural obstacles forced tanks to maneuver carefully. Artillery units positioned on the hills responded by targeting German positions with precise barrages, creating temporary cover for infantry to advance. Smoke and dust from explosions mingled with morning mist, reducing visibility and adding tension to every movement. Air reconnaissance played a pivotal role. Allied pilots flew low to observe German troop movements, marking strongpoints and potential ambushes for ground forces. Strafing runs targeted supply convoys attempting to reinforce German defenders, while bombs destroyed key positions in the villages and surrounding terrain. The combined effect of infantry, armor, artillery, and air support gradually tilted the battle in favor of the Allies. By late afternoon, the Allies had secured the majority of the contested villages along the Salerno beachhead. Casualties were high, with hundreds of soldiers killed or wounded, yet the strategic objectives were achieved. Roads and bridges were captured, providing essential access for advancing forces and establishing a forward staging area for the push inland. As evening descended, soldiers took stock of the battlefield. Fires burned in demolished buildings, smoke lingered over the hills, and the cries of the wounded echoed across the plains. Forward units dug in, prepared for German night counterattacks. Tanks and artillery remained in firing positions, ready to respond to any renewed threat. Engineers reinforced positions and repaired critical infrastructure, ensuring that the beachhead could sustain the advance. The first stage of Operation Avalanche had set the stage for a grueling inland campaign. The Allies had survived the initial landing, repelled counterattacks, and begun the methodical process of advancing into enemy territory. Every gain was paid for in courage, sweat, and blood, and the soldiers of the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada knew that the coming days would demand even greater endurance and skill. The Italian terrain quickly revealed itself to be as deadly as the German defenders. Beyond the beaches and villages of Salerno, the countryside rose into rugged hills and narrow valleys, each a potential trap for advancing Allied units. The roads were sparse and often destroyed by retreating German forces, forcing tanks and trucks to navigate difficult terrain under constant threat. Artillery observers and forward officers mapped routes carefully, knowing that a single ambush could stall the momentum of the campaign. Allied infantry advanced in tight formations, moving through olive groves and rocky hillsides. German snipers and machine guns took advantage of every natural feature, firing from ridges, ruins, and concealed bunkers. Mortars erupted in arcs over the heads of advancing soldiers, creating craters and debris that hindered movement. The terrain amplified the lethality of every German weapon, turning every step forward into a calculated risk. Tanks maneuvered cautiously along narrow paths, their tracks tearing through loose soil and rubble. Sherman and Churchill crews scanned the hills, searching for camouflaged Panther and Panzer IV units hidden behind trees and stone walls. Artillery crews coordinated with armored units, sending shells into suspected enemy positions, detonating obstacles, and forcing defenders to abandon fortified locations. Smoke and dust filled the air, blurring the line between ally and enemy, and amplifying the intensity of every firefight. Air support continued to play a critical role. Fighter-bombers conducted low-level passes over enemy-held hills, strafing infantry and firing rockets at reinforced positions. The roar of engines above mixed with the staccato bursts of machine guns and the heavy thuds of artillery below. German flak attempted to disrupt these operations, but the coordination of Allied air and ground forces kept the defenders off balance. Each airstrike created openings for infantry and tanks to advance, though always at a cost. Engineers worked tirelessly under fire, clearing mines and explosive obstacles left behind by retreating Germans. Roads and bridges were repaired or improvised to allow armored units to support the infantry. Every cleared path brought the Allies closer to strategic objectives, but the effort was slow and dangerous. Casualties mounted with each passing hour, as soldiers faced ambushes in the valleys and sniper fire from ridgelines. One notable engagement occurred near a small hill dominating a key crossroads. German infantry had entrenched themselves in stone walls and ruined farmhouses, while a single Tiger tank fired intermittently from a concealed position. Allied tanks returned fire with precision, while infantry flanked the position through surrounding groves. Mortars and artillery hammered the German stronghold, and engineers prepared demolitions to breach remaining defenses. The battle lasted for hours, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Eventually, Allied forces claimed the hill, opening a crucial pathway for further inland operations. The weather compounded the difficulty of the advance. Heavy rains turned dirt paths into mud, slowing tanks and supply vehicles, while reducing visibility and making movement treacherous. Soldiers struggled to carry equipment through the muck, while medics dragged the wounded to safety along slippery slopes. Communication lines were stretched, and coordination became a delicate balance between speed and caution. Despite these challenges, the Allied advance continued. Villages atop hills were captured one by one, artillery supporting every step. Infantry cleared German positions methodically, moving through houses, courtyards, and ruins. Tanks provided cover, firing at enemy strongpoints and preventing German reinforcements from halting progress. Every successful engagement was immediately reinforced, ensuring that gains could be held against inevitable counterattacks. German forces, though increasingly fragmented, adapted quickly. Ambushes became more sophisticated, and every hill, grove, and road junction was treated as a potential trap. Panzer units, though outnumbered, used mobility and terrain to their advantage, striking swiftly before disappearing into the countryside. Mortar fire targeted Allied supply routes, and snipers harassed engineers and infantry alike. The combination of terrain, weather, and determined defenders made every mile of progress a costly endeavor. By evening, the Allies had secured key hills and villages necessary for consolidating their positions inland. Casualties were high, but the strategic picture was improving. Supply lines were partially stabilized, routes for armor and artillery were established, and German forces were being pushed towards secondary defensive positions. Soldiers tended to the wounded, reinforced their positions, and prepared for renewed combat the next day. The fight for the hills of southern Italy demonstrated the brutal combination of nature and warfare. Every advance required courage, coordination, and relentless determination. The Allies knew that success in these early stages of Operation Avalanche would determine their ability to push further into Italy, break German defensive lines, and ultimately liberate the country from Axis control. The night over the hills was quiet but tense. Fires from previous battles burned in scattered villages, illuminating rocky slopes and shattered groves. Soldiers rested briefly, knowing that dawn would bring renewed attacks, fresh counterstrikes, and the continuation of a grueling campaign that would test the limits of endurance, skill, and resolve. The struggle for Italy had entered its most perilous phase, and the coming days would shape the destiny of the Allied advance. The first light of dawn revealed the harsh reality of the Italian hinterlands. The Allied forces, having secured the immediate beachhead, now faced the formidable task of advancing through the rolling hills and narrow valleys that led deeper into southern Italy. Every path, every road, and every ridge was a potential ambush site, and the German defenders had turned the terrain into a deadly maze. Infantry units moved carefully through olive groves and broken terrain, rifles raised, scanning for movement. German machine gun nests and sniper positions were hidden among the trees and ruins, waiting for unsuspecting soldiers to advance. Mines and improvised explosive devices were scattered across paths, and booby traps were set in abandoned structures. Engineers cleared these obstacles under fire, a dangerous task that demanded precision, courage, and speed. Tanks pushed forward along narrow tracks, their engines roaring through the misty hills. Sherman and Churchill crews scanned the terrain relentlessly, aware that a single concealed panther or tiger could halt the advance. When German armor appeared, the exchange was brutal. Shells tore through vehicles, smoke filled the valleys, and soldiers scrambled for cover. Yet the coordination of infantry, tanks, and artillery allowed the Allies to slowly gain ground, mile by mile. Artillery fire became the backbone of the advance. Batteries positioned on strategic ridges unleashed barrages on German strongpoints, flattening bunkers and clearing the way for infantry. Forward observers adjusted fire with precision, ensuring that shells landed exactly where they could neutralize enemy defenses without endangering advancing troops. Explosions shook the hills, sending dirt and debris into the air, creating temporary cover for soldiers moving forward. The German forces were relentless. Panzer grenadiers and mechanized infantry launched frequent counterattacks, using the terrain to their advantage. Hidden in groves, behind rocks, and in ruins, they struck quickly and withdrew before Allied forces could respond fully. Each ambush tested the discipline and coordination of the advancing units. Tanks fired from concealed positions, and artillery targeted any signs of concentration, creating a deadly chess game across the countryside. A small village atop a strategic hill became the focal point of a particularly intense battle. German infantry fortified every building, placing obstacles in streets and windows, while concealed machine gun teams covered approaches with deadly accuracy. Allied infantry advanced cautiously, room by room, using grenades and flamethrowers to clear strongpoints. Sherman tanks provided cover, firing into fortified positions, while engineers prepared demolitions to breach walls. Smoke, dust, and fire filled the air, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the valley below. Air support remained critical. Allied fighter bombers, strafing and bombing in coordinated runs, targeted enemy armor and artillery positions. Flak fire from German batteries tried to deter them, but low-level attacks disrupted reinforcements and prevented defenders from regrouping. Pilots communicated with ground controllers, marking targets and coordinating with artillery to maximize the impact of every strike. The synergy of air and ground forces slowly turned the tide, but at an enormous cost in men and material. Supply lines were stretched thin, but logistics crews worked tirelessly to maintain the momentum of the advance. Trucks, jeeps, and half-tracks carried ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies through narrow, contested roads. Engineers repaired bridges destroyed by retreating German units, while medics attended to the wounded under constant threat. Every resupply was a lifeline, enabling the front lines to continue pressing forward against stubborn resistance. As the day progressed, Allied units slowly cleared the villages along the main approach to Salerno. Casualties were heavy, but the strategic advantage grew. Roads were secured, ridges were held, and German forces were pushed back into secondary defensive positions. Tanks and artillery remained ready to respond to any counterattack, while infantry prepared positions for the next stage of the campaign. The battles revealed the harsh realities of warfare in Italy: rugged terrain, tenacious defenders, and the constant interplay of firepower, strategy, and endurance. Each advance demanded coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and air support. Every village captured, every hill secured brought the Allies closer to their objectives, but the cost was clear in every scarred landscape and in the exhausted faces of soldiers. As night fell over the Salerno hinterlands, the Allies consolidated their positions. Fires from destroyed German positions cast long shadows over hills and valleys. Soldiers rested briefly, tended to the wounded, and prepared for the next wave of attacks. The road inland was still long and treacherous, but the Allies had proven that relentless determination, coordination, and courage could overcome even the most daunting defenses. Operation Avalanche had moved beyond the beaches. The campaign for southern Italy was underway, and every mile of territory gained brought the Allies closer to their ultimate objective, the liberation of Italy from Axis control. Yet, as the shadows of night stretched across the hills, all knew that tomorrow would bring new battles, fresh resistance, and another brutal test of will and endurance. Part 6. Panzer Counterstrikes and Inland Advance. The dawn broke over the Italian countryside, revealing a landscape scarred by relentless combat. The Allies had secured the Salerno beachhead and its surrounding villages, but the German command was far from defeated. From hidden positions in the hills and forests, armored units and mechanized infantry prepared for a counterstrike that could potentially sever the fragile Allied supply lines. The tension in the forward units was palpable. Every soldier knew that a single well-coordinated German attack could undo days of hard-won progress. Allied reconnaissance reported movements in the wooded ridges. German Panzer IV and Panther tanks, supported by mechanized infantry, advanced with caution, utilizing natural cover and terrain to conceal their approach. Artillery observers noted enemy assembly points, while forward Allied units hastily prepared defensive positions. The air was thick with anticipation, and the smell of smoke and mud mixed with the early morning chill. The first volleys of German artillery landed with terrifying precision. Explosions tore into dug-in Allied infantry positions, throwing dirt and debris into the air. Mortars and machine gun nests added to the cacophony, while artillery observers quickly relayed coordinates for counter-battery fire. Allied tanks responded, firing high-explosive shells at enemy armored formations, sending smoke and twisted metal into the valleys. The battle for dominance over the hills of southern Italy had reached a fever pitch. Infantry units moved methodically, taking cover behind the natural and man-made features of the landscape. Every movement was deliberate, each step forward met with fire from concealed German positions. Engineers cleared mines and booby traps under relentless pressure, ensuring that tanks and supply convoys could continue their advance. Artillery strikes created temporary lanes of safety, but the cost was high. Every gain was paid for in blood and exhaustion. Air support played a decisive role once again. Allied fighter bombers, strafing and dropping rockets, struck German tanks and artillery positions. The roar of engines combined with the relentless rattle of machine guns and the thudding of heavy shells, creating a symphony of war that echoed across the valleys. Flak fire erupted intermittently, but the pilots' skill and coordination with ground forces allowed the Allies to maintain air superiority over the battlefield. One of the most intense confrontations occurred near a ridge dominating a critical road network. German armor attempted to break through and cut off the Allied advance, but the coordinated response of Sherman and Churchill tanks, supported by infantry and artillery, blunted the attack. The ground shook with explosions, and thick black smoke obscured visibility. Infantry squads maneuvered around destroyed vehicles, clearing pockets of resistance while engineers prepared demolition charges to eliminate remaining fortifications. The fighting spread across small villages and farmhouses, each structure a potential stronghold. Allied soldiers moved from room to room, methodically clearing German defenders while tanks provided covering fire. Streets became mazes of rubble, smoke, and fire. Snipers, mortars, and machine guns challenged every step forward, forcing soldiers to adapt quickly to an ever-changing battlefield. Casualties were high, but every position taken further solidified the Allied grip on the hinterlands. By midday, the German counterattacks began to falter. Continuous bombardment from artillery and air strikes disrupted their coordination. Tanks were immobilized, infantry units scattered, and supply lines strained. Allied forces seized the opportunity, advancing into key villages and taking high ground that had been hotly contested. Engineers reinforced captured positions, prepared anti-tank obstacles, and ensured that routes for advancing armor remained open. The coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and air support was at its peak. Forward observers relayed enemy movements in real time, directing artillery fire and airstrikes to suppress resistance. Tanks supported infantry at every turn, providing heavy firepower against fortified positions and preventing German units from regrouping. Smoke, dust, and fire filled the hills, blending the landscape into a chaotic theater of destruction. As the day drew to a close, the Allies had made significant progress inland. Strategic villages and key ridges were in their hands, supply lines remained operational, and German counterattacks had been contained. The cost was steep, but the combined arms approach, infantry, tanks, artillery, and air support, demonstrated the Allies' growing mastery of the battlefield. Nightfall brought a brief respite. Soldiers tended to the wounded, repaired equipment, and fortified positions for the inevitable counterstrikes that would come at first light. Fires from destroyed German positions illuminated the terrain, casting long shadows over the hills and valleys. The Allies had survived yet another day of relentless combat, pushing forward despite formidable resistance, and the path deeper into Italy was slowly opening. Operation Avalanche was far from over. Each advance revealed new challenges, and the Allies knew that every mile gained would be met with fierce German resistance. Yet the successes of this day had proven one undeniable truth: coordination, courage, and relentless pressure could overcome even the most determined defenders. The campaign for Italy continued, and the battles to come would test every soldier, every unit, and every ounce of Allied resolve. The following morning, the Italian hills awoke to a tense silence, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery and the low drone of reconnaissance aircraft. The Allies had consolidated their positions, but German forces remained entrenched, determined to halt the inland advance. The task ahead was clear: break through the secondary defensive lines, secure strategic roadways, and push the enemy further inland. Every unit knew that failure meant being pinned down, and that victory would come only through relentless coordination, courage, and sheer determination. Infantry formations advanced cautiously, using cover provided by ruined farmhouses, stone walls, and the natural folds of the terrain. The German defenders were cunning, laying mines and tripwires along predictable routes, and establishing machine gun nests to sweep open fields. Snipers took advantage of every ridge and broken structure, forcing soldiers to move in short, calculated bursts. Engineers worked at the front lines, clearing obstacles and maintaining supply paths, often under direct enemy fire. Tanks led the push along the narrow roads and rugged trails. Sherman and Churchill crews scanned for hidden Panthers and Panzer IVs, moving methodically to avoid ambushes. When German armor appeared, the battlefield erupted in fire and smoke. Tank shells tore through fortified positions, creating breaches for advancing infantry. Explosions shook the ground, sending earth and debris into the air, while smoke and dust obscured visibility, forcing both sides to adapt to the chaotic environment. Artillery units maintained constant pressure on the German lines. From ridges overlooking the valleys, Allied gunners fired with deadly accuracy, targeting machine gun emplacements, fortified houses, and enemy concentrations. Forward observers adjusted fire in real time, ensuring that shells struck precisely where needed, disrupting counterattacks and creating cover for infantry and armor. Mortar teams supplemented the bombardments, adding indirect fire to suppress enemy positions. Air support intensified as the day progressed. Typhoons and Spitfires conducted low-level strafing runs against German supply routes and defensive positions. Rockets and bombs tore through fortified strongpoints, forcing defenders to abandon positions or risk annihilation. Flak fire from the German units attempted to counter these attacks, but Allied pilots executed evasive maneuvers and coordinated strikes, minimizing losses while maximizing damage. Reconnaissance flights provided vital intelligence, allowing commanders to direct ground forces effectively. The fight centered on a series of hilltop villages that controlled access to the interior valleys. German infantry had fortified each building, laying traps and preparing fallback positions. Allied infantry engaged in grueling house-to-house combat, using grenades, flamethrowers, and rifle fire to clear rooms and streets. Tanks fired into strongpoints, demolishing walls and creating passages for infantry to advance. The terrain and enemy defenses made each building a battlefield unto itself, and every gain was measured in blood and sacrifice. German counterattacks were relentless. Panzer grenadiers attempted flanking maneuvers, while artillery targeted roads and supply lines. Tanks struck suddenly from concealed positions, forcing Allied units to respond quickly. Yet the combined arms approach proved effective. Infantry, armor, artillery, and air support worked in tandem, repelling attacks while maintaining forward momentum. Each German push was met with precision fire and coordinated maneuvers, gradually eroding the enemy's capacity to resist. Supply lines remained a lifeline. Trucks, jeeps, and half-tracks navigated narrow, contested roads to deliver ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies. Engineers repaired damaged bridges and cleared debris, ensuring that armor and infantry could continue their advance. Medics moved tirelessly among the wounded, stabilizing casualties before evacuation to rear positions. Every logistical success reinforced the Allies' ability to sustain momentum and pressure on German forces. By late afternoon, the Allied forces had secured the majority of the hilltop villages. Roads and key intersections were under Allied control, enabling armored units to support further inland operations. German resistance, though still formidable, had been weakened and forced to retreat to secondary defensive positions. The landscape bore the marks of relentless combat, smoke rising from destroyed buildings, craters from artillery shells, and the remnants of vehicles scattered across valleys and hillsides. Nightfall provided a temporary reprieve. Soldiers dug in, reinforced positions, and tended to the wounded. Fires from destroyed positions cast long shadows across the hills, while the faint sound of distant artillery reminded everyone that the battle was far from over. The successes of the day demonstrated that the combined might of infantry, tanks, artillery, and air support could overcome even the most determined German defenses, but the campaign into southern Italy would demand even more courage, endurance, and sacrifice in the days to come. Operation Avalanche had advanced further inland, but the most grueling battles were yet to come. Every village captured, every ridge secured, was a step closer to breaking German defensive lines, yet the path to victory remained perilous, and every soldier knew that tomorrow would bring renewed fighting, fierce resistance, and the unyielding challenge of war. The dawn broke over southern Italy with an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery and the faint whistle of reconnaissance aircraft. The Allies, having secured the Salerno beachhead and the surrounding villages and hills, now faced the daunting task of pushing further inland. The German defenders, though battered and forced to retreat, had regrouped, fortifying positions in the valleys and along key road networks. Every mile gained demanded coordination, courage, and relentless determination. Infantry moved cautiously through the rolling countryside, navigating olive groves, ruined villages, and narrow valleys. Each step forward was a potential trap. German snipers, machine gun nests, and mortars were hidden in plain sight, exploiting every ridge, building, and stone wall. Engineers worked tirelessly to clear mines, demolitions, and roadblocks, ensuring that tanks and supply convoys could maintain momentum. The landscape itself was as much an enemy as the German forces, with narrow paths and rugged terrain challenging even the most seasoned units. Tanks pushed forward along the roads and cleared paths through open terrain, providing critical support for infantry units. Sherman and Churchill crews scanned for hidden Panthers and Panzer IVs, exchanging fire and lethal bursts that echoed across valleys. Explosions shook the earth as shells impacted German strongpoints, and thick smoke obscured the battlefield, creating both cover and chaos. Every maneuver was deliberate, every advance measured, and every loss counted in the growing tally of casualties. Allied artillery maintained unrelenting pressure. Batteries positioned on hillsides fired with deadly accuracy into German defensive lines, targeting bunkers, fortified buildings, and enemy concentrations. Forward observers relayed coordinates in real time, adjusting fire to respond to shifting German positions. Mortars added indirect fire, softening strongpoints and creating temporary cover for advancing infantry. The combined effect of artillery and armor gradually forced the German units into retreat, but not without fierce resistance. Air support remained essential. Allied fighter bombers conducted repeated strafing and bombing runs, targeting enemy armor, supply lines, and artillery positions. Flak fire from German units attempted to counter the attacks, but skilled pilots executed coordinated maneuvers, minimizing losses and maximizing disruption. Reconnaissance planes scouted ahead, identifying potential ambushes and guiding ground forces along the safest and most effective routes. The synergy between air and ground operations became increasingly evident, shaping the momentum of the campaign. The fight for key villages and road junctions inland became intense and chaotic. German defenders, though dwindling in numbers, fought with tenacity, launching counterattacks and using the terrain to their advantage. Allied infantry advanced house to house, clearing streets, courtyards, and basements. Tanks fired into fortified positions, demolishing walls and opening passages for soldiers. Engineers placed charges to eliminate strongpoints, often under direct fire, while medics treated the wounded amidst the chaos. By midday, the Allies had captured several strategic villages, securing roads and crossroads essential for further inland operations. German forces, though attempting to regroup, were increasingly constrained by continuous artillery and air strikes, dwindling supplies, and the relentless pressure of coordinated Allied attacks. Infantry, tanks, and artillery worked in seamless coordination, each element supporting the others and ensuring that gains were consolidated and held against enemy counterattacks. As the afternoon wore on, the German defensive lines began to collapse. Retreating units attempted to regroup in the hills, but Allied forces pursued methodically, using reconnaissance and artillery to prevent the establishment of new strongholds. Every hill captured, every village secured, brought the Allies closer to their ultimate objective, breaking through southern Italy and establishing a pathway toward Rome. By evening, the Allies had established firm control over the inland road network, key villages, and high ground. The casualties were severe, and the scars of combat were evident in every destroyed building, cratered road, and twisted vehicle. Yet the strategic advantage was undeniable. Supply lines were intact, units were repositioned and reinforced, and German resistance had been significantly weakened. Night fell, bringing a temporary respite. Soldiers dug in, repaired equipment, and tended to the wounded. Fires from destroyed German positions illuminated the countryside, casting long shadows over the hills and valleys. The victories of the day were hard-earned, but they demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms warfare, infantry, armor, artillery, and air support operating in concert against a determined enemy. Operation Avalanche had achieved its immediate objectives. The Salerno beachhead was secured, surrounding villages and hills were under Allied control, and German defensive lines were fractured. Yet the campaign for Italy was far from over. Every soldier knew that the path to liberation would continue to demand courage, endurance, and relentless determination. The battles had tested men and machines alike, but the Allies had proven that perseverance, strategy, and coordination could overcome even the most formidable defenses. As the night settled across the Italian hills, the soldiers of the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada prepared for the next phase of the campaign. The victories of Operation Avalanche were a testament to human resolve in the face of adversity, and the road ahead promised further trials, greater challenges, and the unwavering determination to liberate Italy from Axis control.